Have you been watching the news and thinking, what is happening? Why is this happening? Where can I turn for peace? This is how I've been feeling. That is why this episode's coming out a little later than I usually release them. I just needed a little time and space to collect my thoughts. So today, I'm going to be sharing something that has been on my heart and my mind over the last little while. Welcome to this week's episode of the Seasons of Joy podcast. My name is Jill Pack, and this is episode 174 entitled Becoming Peacemakers, President Nelson's Call to Transform Conflict. Before I begin, I want to offer something to you. I call them clarity conversations. They're usually for people who are curious about what it's like to work with me. We talk about whatever you're struggling with, and I help you gain clarity and new perspective around your challenge. But today, I want to open this up to anyone listening, whether you've worked with me before or not, whether you're curious about coaching or you just need someone to talk to right now. The world feels heavy. There are heartbreaking events happening that affect us deeply, and we aren't meant to navigate these difficulties alone. So, if you need a space to process what you're feeling, to talk through what's on your heart, or to help you regulate your nervous system when everything feels overwhelming, I'm here for you. This conversation is available to you. And if you know someone who would benefit from a conversation like this, please share this episode with them. Sometimes people don't know where to turn or who to talk to. You could be the person who connects them to the support they need. Just visit my website, www.seasons-coaching.com, and click on the Work With Me tab. As many of you know, I am a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and today we're going to dive into President Russell M. Nelson's powerful talk, Peacemakers Needed, from his April 2023 General Conference address. Russell M. Nelson was the prophet and president of our church, and he recently passed away. And I've been reflecting on the impact he has had and his teachings have had on my life. This talk in particular was pivotal for me and many other people of my faith. It has been talked about and quoted by many, many people, but I feel like this topic cannot be emphasized enough. In honor of President Nelson, I'm going to explore 5 quotes from this talk that can help us reframe how we approach conflict. This isn't just about being nice or avoiding conflict. We're going to be talking about conflict transformation, changing the very nature of how we engage with the people and situations in our lives, because this information is needed now more than ever. Hopefully, by the end of this episode, you can use President Nelson's words as a roadmap for becoming a peacemaker in your most challenging relationships. Have you ever found yourself in the middle of a heated disagreement? Maybe it's about politics, parenting decisions, work issues, or past hurts that keep resurfacing. Your heart is racing. You're mentally rehearsing all the reasons why you're right. And you're building this case in your mind for why the other person is completely wrong and being unreasonable. You feel justified in your anger. But what if everything you're doing in that moment is actually making peace impossible? What if there is a different way? The first quote I want to talk about is on true discipleship. President Nelson taught the Savior's true disciples build, lift, encourage, persuade, and inspire. No matter how difficult the situation, true disciples of Jesus Christ are peacemakers. What does this mean for conflict transformation? This quote hits different when you're in the middle of a conflict. Notice what it's not saying. He doesn't say disciples need to prove they're right. He doesn't say disciples win arguments. And he doesn't say disciples make sure everyone knows who's at fault. Instead, look at the words, the verbs that he uses: build, lift, encourage, persuade, inspire. Every single one of those requires you to be for the other person. Even when you disagree with them, you are seeing them as a human being just like you, even when they've hurt you, even when they're completely wrong about something. This is the foundation of conflict transformation. Traditional conflict resolution asks, how do we find a compromise? But conflict transformation asks this question: how do we change the very nature of this relationship so that we can see each other differently? Let's say your mother in law constantly criticizes your parenting. Every visit becomes a battlefield. Maybe you have prepared these defensive arguments. You've felt your body tense up and you've spent hours afterward replaying the conversation over and over in your head. When we look at President Nelson's quote, what would it look like to build, lift, and encourage in this situation? Now, you might be thinking, but she's the one attacking me. And that's where most of us get stuck. We think peacemaking means the other person has to change first. But the transformation comes before seeing your mother in law. How can I see my mother in law as someone struggling rather than someone attacking? By taking the time to ask this question, you may begin to see that your mother in law is actually terrified about becoming irrelevant or not as important to her grandchildren's lives. She's fighting for connection the only way she knows how. This doesn't mean you have to agree with the criticism, but what if you could respond with, I can tell you really care about the kids. Instead of defending your choices, this small shift in perspective can begin transforming the entire relationship. But there's a key distinction. Being a peacemaker doesn't mean being passive. It doesn't mean letting people walk all over you. It means you're actively working to build something better. Even in difficult situations, you're transforming conflict from a battle to be won into a relationship to be strengthened. Peacemaking and contention are both choices. So, quote 2 is about choosing peace. President Nelson made it very clear: contention is a choice, peacemaking is a choice. Anger never persuades, hostility builds no one. So, why is this important? When we first hear this quote, it may cause us to pause a little, because when we're in conflict, it doesn't feel like a choice. It feels like we're reacting to someone else's poor behavior. It feels like they started it. They're the one who is being unreasonable, and our anger is the natural, justified response. But when you understand this truth, you set yourself free. Your response is always a choice. This isn't an easy choice. It isn't a comfortable choice, but it is a choice nonetheless. And this is where conflict transformation really begins. When you recognize that you have personal agency in every single interaction, no matter what the other person is saying or doing. But there's a subtle trap. We can often deceive ourselves by the narrative playing in our brains. Things like, well, I'm not being hostile. I'm being honest. I'm just setting boundaries. I'm standing up for myself. But we need to ask ourselves these 3 critical questions. Am I trying to persuade with anger? Am I trying to build with hostility? Am I choosing contention and calling it something else? President Nelson doesn't mince words here. He is very clear. Anger never persuades, period. Hostility builds no one, period. Think about the last time someone persuaded you of something while they were angry with you. I'm guessing this has never happened. Anger makes people defensive. Hostility makes people shut down. Contention only creates more contention. I remember a time in a business situation where I felt completely justified in my frustration. A colleague had taken offense to something and was ready to end our collaboration. This was a big deal, and I needed to have a conversation with them. I had 2 choices: address it with the energy of you messed up and I need you to know it, or I could address it with the energy of something went wrong and we need to solve it together. Same issue, but completely different energy. The first choice feels satisfying in the moment, right? It makes us feel strong. We get to release our anger and maybe even feel righteous in our anger, but it doesn't actually solve anything. It just creates defensiveness and damages the relationship. The second choice requires us to lay down our need to be right, our need to express our anger, our need to make them feel bad. It actually requires us to choose peacemaking over contention. And the crazy thing is that when we choose peacemaking, problems actually get solved. When we choose contention, we might win the battle, but we lose the relationship. In my business relationship, we were able to have an honest conversation. And instead of the other person being defensive, we could come up with a solution to our problem together. Quote number 3. This is about identifying followers of Jesus Christ. President Nelson taught one of the easiest way to identify a true follower of Jesus Christ is how compassionately that person treats other people. This one can feel a little uncomfortable. It's so easy to look around and evaluate everyone else's level of discipleship, but President Nelson is holding up a mirror for us to take a good look at ourselves. If someone followed you around for a week and listened to how you talk to your spouse when you're frustrated, or how you speak about the coworker who annoys you, or how you respond to your teenage child who's pushing boundaries, and how you react to the political post from your family member, or how you treat the customer service person when something goes wrong, what would they decide or conclude about your discipleship? Often, many of us have a massive compassion gap between how we treat strangers and how we treat the people closest to us. We'll be patient and kind with a stranger at the grocery store, but then go home and snap at our spouse. We'll give grace to a friend going through a hard time, but judge our sister for making the same choices. We'll be understanding of a coworker's mistake, but criticize our child for theirs. I remember my kids, they would say I had a telephone voice. The phone would ring and I would have a nice voice, and then I would hang up, and then I would get upset at them about something. So they noticed that difference. Why? Because conflict is easier with people who don't matter as much to us. The stakes are lower. But the people we're in deep relationship with, the people who can really hurt us, the ones who have history with us, the ones who have choices that affect our lives, that's where real character shows up. Conflict transformation requires compassion, not just empathy, where we understand what someone is feeling, but compassion, where we've moved to act with kindness because of what the other person is experiencing. This means we see our teenage daughter's eye roll as insecurity rather than disrespect. We see our spouse's criticism as fear rather than an attack. We see our parents' control as anxiety rather than manipulation. And we're seeing our friends' distance as overwhelm rather than rejection. When we lead with compassion, we can transform how we show up in the conflict of our lives. We become curious instead of defensive. We become concerned instead of critical. We become part of the solution instead of part of the problem. So here's something I invite you to try. When you're feeling yourself getting frustrated with someone, pause and ask, what might be true about their struggle that I can't see? Not what excuse can I make for them, but what real human struggle might be driving their behavior. This doesn't mean we excuse harmful behavior. It means we see the person behind the behavior, and that changes how we engage with them. Quote number 4, on charity as the solution. President Nelson declared, the pure love of Christ is the answer to the contention that ails us today. Charity propels us to bear one another's burdens rather than heap burdens upon each other. This quote invites us to evaluate whether we are bearing burdens or heaping them. In conflict, we almost always think we're the one carrying the burdens while the other person is heaping them on us. But President Nelson is asking us to examine our own behavior because at the end of the day, that is all we have control over. So when you're in conflict with someone, are you listening to understand or listening to refute? Are you offering support or offering criticism? Are you making their life easier or harder? Are you helping them carry what they're going through, or are you adding to what they are carrying? This is hard because often we are heaping burdens while telling ourselves we're being helpful. So, what does this look like? In a marriage conflict, it might look like you saying, I told you that wouldn't work, which is adding shame to their struggle. In a parenting conflict, it might look like you saying, when I was your age, I never, which is adding comparison and shame to their challenge. In a friend conflict, it might look like going silent and making them guess what's wrong, which just adds confusion to the hurt. In a work conflict, it might look like complaining about someone to other people instead of addressing it directly, which adds damage to their reputation on top of the original problem. Every one of these responses heaps burdens. Charity does the opposite. So, what does bearing burdens look like? Charity in conflict looks like this. We might say, I can see this is really hard for you. How can I help you? Or, I'm struggling with what happened. Can we talk about it? Or, you seem stressed. What's going on? Or, I care about our relationship. Let's figure this out together. Do you notice the difference? Bearing burdens requires you to set aside your need to be right, your need to punish, your need to make them understand how much they hurt you. It requires you to show up with the pure love of Christ, a love that seeks their good even when you're in pain. When you approach conflict with charity, you transform it from a battle into a collaboration. Instead of me against you, it becomes us against the problem. We can turn things around by asking questions like, how can I bear your burden? Instead of, why are you making life so hard? Parent child relationships can begin to heal when parents stop heaping expectations and start bearing the weight of their child's struggles with them. This is conflict transformation at its core. It is changing the fundamental question from who's right to how can we help each other. Quote number 5 is about self-examination. President Nelson invites us, now is the time to lay aside bitterness. Now is the time to cease insisting that it is your way or no way. Notice President Nelson doesn't say, now is the time for the other person to apologize, or now is the time for them to change. He says, now is the time for you to lay aside bitterness, for you to stop insisting on your way. This is where conflict transformation gets really personal, because we want to believe that peace will come when the other person changes. But peace actually comes when we change how we're holding the conflict. So, what are we holding on to? Ask yourself honestly these questions. What bitterness am I nursing? What grudge am I keeping alive? What wrong am I replaying over and over? Where am I insisting it must be my way? What do I need to be right about? These are the things that keep conflict alive. It isn't actually about the original disagreement or the other person's flaws. We keep conflict, or I should say, we live in contention because of the things we are holding on to. But there's a cost to this bitterness. You've probably heard the phrase, bitterness is like drinking poison and waiting for the other person to die. It doesn't hurt them, but it hurts you. It keeps you trapped in the past, unable to move forward. It shapes the lens through which you view every interaction and makes peace almost impossible, or at least feel impossible. Bitterness can feel righteous. It feels like you're honoring the wrong that was done to you. It feels like letting go means the other person wins. But bitterness doesn't protect you. It feels like it does, but it actually imprisons you. There is freedom that comes from being able to lay the bitterness aside. Doesn't mean what happened was okay. It doesn't mean you're weak or you're letting them off the hook. It means you're choosing freedom over bondage. You're choosing peace over payback. You're choosing to transform the conflict. When you lay aside your insistence on being right, something amazing happens. You could even call it miraculous. You create space for actual connection. You open the door for real conversation. You make room for the other person to soften too. It can be so easy to wait for the other person to apologize and believe that we are right to feel hurt by what happened. Of course, we're going to feel hurt. But when we live in that hurt, we become bitter. But our bitterness doesn't punish the other person, it punishes us. We are missing out on connection in our relationships. Carrying this heavy burden every single day keeps us trapped. We can decide to lay it down, not because the other person deserves it, not because what happened was okay, but because we deserve peace. This is not easy, but it allows us to transform conflict. We don't have to wait for the other person to change. We can change ourselves. We can clean up our side of the street. That's conflict transformation. Let's review what President Nelson taught us, the 5 principles of becoming a peacemaker. 1, true disciples take action. We build, we lift, we encourage, we persuade, and inspire, especially in difficult situations. Number 2, peacemaking is always a choice. You can choose your response even when their behavior is wrong. Number 3, compassion is the identifier. How you treat others reveals your discipleship more than anything else. 4, charity transforms conflict. Focus on bearing burdens instead of heaping them. And 5, let go of what blocks peace. Lay aside bitterness and the insistence on your way. So here's a challenge for you. Pick one relationship where there's conflict or tension right now. It might be big or small. And then observe yourself. Notice when you're choosing contention over peacemaking. Notice when you're heaping burdens instead of bearing them. Just observe without judgment. And then number 2, ask questions. What burden might this person be carrying that I can't see? Am I trying to persuade them with anger or hostility? What bitterness am I holding on to? And 3, take action. Choose one specific way to build, lift, or encourage. Look for an opportunity to bear their burden instead of adding to it. Practice letting go of your need to be right. That's it. One relationship, 5 principles. So here's what might happen. Best case scenario, the relationship starts to shift. The other person responds to your change. Peace becomes possible. Here's the realistic case scenario. You feel more peace even if the other person doesn't change. You're no longer trapped by bitterness and anger. You've transformed your experience of the conflict. Hard case scenario. Nothing changes externally, but you've proven to yourself that you can be a peacemaker regardless of your circumstances. And that changes how you move through the world. When we become a peacemaker, it doesn't just change one relationship, it changes you. And when you change, you show up differently everywhere else in your life, in every relationship. Your kids watch you and how you handle conflict with compassion instead of hostility, and they learn a better way. Your spouse experiences you bearing burdens instead of heaping them, and your marriage deepens. Your friends see you laying aside bitterness instead of nursing grudges, and they feel safer being vulnerable with you. Your coworkers notice you building and lifting instead of criticizing, and your whole workplace culture shifts. One person choosing to be a peacemaker creates ripples that spread far beyond what you can see. President Nelson isn't asking us to be doormats. He's not asking us to pretend everything is fine when it's not. He's not asking us to accept abuse or stay in harmful situations. He's asking us to operate at a higher level, to engage conflict in a way that transforms it rather than perpetuates it, to be disciples of Jesus Christ, not just in word, but in how we treat people when things get hard. This is the path of true conflict transformation. It isn't about avoiding or winning conflict. It's about transforming it. So I want to invite you to see yourself as someone who is becoming a peacemaker, not someone who has arrived, not someone who does it perfectly, but someone who is trying, who is actively choosing to build, lift, encourage, persuade, and inspire, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard, because the world desperately needs peacemakers right now. Your family needs a peacemaker right now. Your workplace needs a peacemaker right now. Your community needs a peacemaker right now. President Nelson has made it very clear that peacemaker is you. That peacemaker is me. We are all invited to be peacemakers. So, where do we go from here? If this message resonated with you and you want to go deeper, do the challenge I talked about. Share this episode with someone who needs to hear it. And if you want personal support in transforming your conflict in your life, my website, seasons-coaching.com, to learn about working with me one-on-one. That is all I have for you today. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time, remember, contention is a choice. Peacemaking is a choice. And you have more power to transform conflict than you think you do. One compassionate interaction at a time. Have a joyful week.